preparing a SEP that talks around the dependencies that we have for things like Python, for example, what Python versions, and what are we going to do within the release for that. And then lastly, as folks who have been following the POP topic a little bit closer, you'll recognize that part of the appeal of the POP packaging is that it sort of removes the need for the variations around the operating systems. So we also plan to talk about that and make sure that we address how that sort of makes life a little bit simpler. But in a nutshell, and I think Sage, if you don't mind posting the link to the product page, for those who are listening to this after, or reading the minute notes, there is a particular page that has essentially the official table of what's supported. Thank you, Sage, for posting that. Number two, we're going to improve on that document by talking about operating systems. The one that folks seem to be asking about, for example, is Ubuntu 20. So we'll talk about what has been tested, etc., so that folks understand what we know works, what we haven't yet tried. We'll also then have the SEP out, which I'm going to invite Megan to talk about it briefly on the Python dependencies. And then lastly, we'll clarify some additional information about POP packaging and how that is just going to alter that whole particular process. Before I hand it to Megan on the SEP, Gareth, anything I missed or you want to add? I know you've been interfacing with some of these comments on the community channels.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to address the one major one that I think a lot of people are struggling with as we start to see the distributions, the Linux distributions, and a lot of OS packages moving to the newer versions of Python quicker than we can support them, particularly like the move to Python 3.8, where there were a lot of changes made that break a lot of functionality in Salt. We realize that, and we're taking steps to kind of address that and alleviate those problems. One in particular is our move, which has been documented in the SEP and announced at many open hours so far. The move to all the packages that we provide officially from SaltSec, using Salt or using pop build to build them. And so moving to that route, we provide the version of Python that will be installed. And so a lot of the issues of supported versions of Python on the OS kind of go away. I had another point that I was going to make and I completely blanked on it. So I'll hand it back to you, Mo.
I have one question about that first. With the if pop is being used to build it, has the obvious question would be pip states. How do those work? Is there would that obviously it wouldn't work if it's a single binary, right? Would it only work if it was distributed as a wonder?
So yeah, that's a good question. So we are actually looking at providing both a wonder version of the pop build packages as well as a single binary. And we're looking at, there's open efforts right now to get like pip and pip states working with both approaches.
Cool.
Thank you, Eric, for the question. David Murphy also, by the way, has been using POP to package a few of the native minions for Juniper, Arista, and so on. So I don't know, David, if you just want to give a little preview on that. And I know we'll cover more of it on POP, and then we'll hand it over to Megan to talk about the SEP.
Yeah, the native minions have been built for a number of switch router vendors, like they were announced at SaltConf 2019, Arista, Juniper, Cisco. It's been working really well. It's been able to package up all the dependencies, and as you can imagine, some of these switch vendors are running on kernels which are quite old at this point and limited in space and size as what can be done. Also, they have certain locales like C in POSIX, and that's it. But by using POP build with the salt bin and using Python 3.7 and PEPs 538 and 540, we're being able to handle UTF-8 in self-contained inside the native minion binaries that are running on those platforms without any trouble whatsoever. we're basically in the stage of fine polish on those minions. They've been working in labs, scaling in environments up to thousands. So being pounded hard, and everything has worked so well. I think the hardest part I encountered with pop build was getting Python 3.7 onto a certain platform that was 32-bit. Other than that, once I had Python 3.7 on that platform, pop build was just like a snap of the fingers, 2 minutes, and I had a running minion. It was just wonderful to use. I think it's going to ease up our dependency burdens to a very large extent. Some of the previous releases recently have been delayed because we had to backport stuff to things like Debian 8. But even though while they're going out of end of life in 2 months' time, at the time there was still quite a bit of roadway on them, and it was tiresome to have to do it, whereas pop would have made our lives a lot easier if we supported Python 3 on Debian 8. That's
Thank you,
my
David.
view of it.
Yeah, no, thank you. Megan, do you want to talk briefly about the SEP on that front? And then we'll Cassandra, I think that will be our update for the topic of the week.
Yep, let me share the link to the SEP. It's gonna go into final comment period next week, so any more insight and review on that is great. Essentially, what it's saying is that we're going to be aligning with whatever Python support is. So, for example, Python 3.5 and above will be supported in Sodium, since 3.4 was deprecated. I can't remember the exact date, but it's been deprecated for a bit. And also, as stated before, we're trying to get 3.8 into Sodium as well, since that's the newer version. So that's about it, unless anybody has questions. And you can look at that set for all the details as well.
And the links to the SEP and the support lifecycle, I'll publish those in the notes from the open hour meeting so you can refer back to them. All right, on to the CVE release and kind of a status update and what happened with that. First of all, just before I hand it over to Mo and Sage and everybody else, I want to say thank you all for your patience. And we appreciate all of you holding out while we got that whole issue resolved. But Mo is going to go into more details.
Actually, Diwaz and I wanted to give the update on the exciting topic of the moment, which was the CVE release. As Cassandra said, thank you, team, for everybody's help. A quick rundown in here. I think we aim to try and provide an update mostly on where we are with the release itself, but also on our observations of things that did not go to plan and our plans for improving on them. So if you're listening or reading the minutes afterwards, please feel free to send us some additional questions or feedback. Appreciate this. This is a community effort on how we try and improve here. So as everybody was aware, last week we made everybody, we communicated with the community, our clients, of the fact that a security issue was identified. The team came together, worked with the security firm, which now publicly is aware, everybody's aware is F-Secure, on actually understanding that particular risk, providing patches for them, and working with them behind the scenes to ensure that they actually tested the patches and verified that they closed off the vulnerability. That particular process, through the advice of working with them, we concluded that we're going to take one of two options. We took the option of alerting people ahead of time, just to ensure that folks are ready and prepared for when we would drop, the CVE packages and patches. We had promised to have those out yesterday, and as we proceeded with the release process for the packages and had sort of the checklist of our rollout, unfortunately we encountered an issue that we'll get into the detail of, that essentially turned what would have been a 30-minute process into a multi-hour process that went late into the day. One of the things I want to highlight is, as of this morning, the patches are available. The packages are available. We've had several clients come back to us and confirm that they've been able to apply those packages and be able to verify that everything has been running and smooth. Also wanted to confirm that we have made patches available for 2017 and 2018. Recognizing that this was, a high severity issue, we want to make sure that we didn't leave, a time gap for where, a good portion of the, of the install base was at. So we provided those patches as well. And if there's any questions, please let us know. If any help is needed, please let us know. I want to thank the community members, many of whom who have stepped up and have been answering questions and helping some of the newer SOLT users with upgrade questions, patch applying questions, and so on. It's just genuinely been phenomenal to see how the community is rallied to help each other make sure that we're secure and quickly patched up quickly. So let's move into the three areas that I think we could have improved on. I think the first one is frankly speaking, the actual technical issue. What caused this delay? We've been trying to diagnose through this. We've had actually some cloud hosting issues that we thought were problematic, but that was not the case. We thought it could just be the remote location and so on. But throughout yesterday, we were able to get to the bottom of it, and Diwaz will cover that in a moment. So we did have what I would describe as an operator error, essentially that caused an indexing issue that caused the whole repo to essentially get uploaded. So that's number one, what went wrong and what we're going to do about it. Number two is, I think, which is the more significant item, is around communications. Many of the community felt that things can go wrong when they shouldn't go wrong. Absolutely, that's the worst timing for things to go wrong. But we could have done a much better job keeping the community informed and updated as to our progress. So I want to take personal responsibility for that, as part of being one of the leaders in the community, and I want to acknowledge that that's absolutely something we should have, improved on, and we have a plan now and an action that we'll describe in a moment around how to make sure that we address that. But certainly, thanks everybody who's been patient with us. I also want to thank those who are not patient with us, because it, of course, alerted us to make sure that we are giving the updates necessary. It doesn't matter if the update, frankly, was not necessarily of substance, but just to be able to send a pulse out that says, hey, we're still awaiting, we're still working, would have been helpful to the team. So that was issue number two, communication, both frequency, content, and making sure people are prepared, especially when people had teams ready overnight to apply those patches. So again, my apologies, and thank you again for the community for helping us improve on that front. The third one was frankly around the notion of testing, and that comes in two flavors. Number one, this particular patch that got applied was for an issue that, as you can see, has been in our code base for some time. So there is an element of how do we test and ensure that such a change that got introduced into our code base should have been verified in the first place, to have made sure that the vulnerability was not introduced at all. That is partly, why we are now getting very focused on making sure that we ask for folks for tests with PRs. We would have expected and hoped that, this particular vulnerability would have caught had we structured, a test alongside the PR. The second side of it, of course, is known issues and known vulnerabilities. We've identified as part of our testing gaps that even though we certified the patches, we discovered one or two errors afterwards. So let me hand it over to Diwaz to talk about both item number one, which is what's the operator error that caused this and what are we doing about it? And then number two, maybe give a little bit more details around some of the known issues that are very edge cases and we've intercepted as well. Diwaz?
Sure, thanks, Mo. So as far as item number one goes, the sort of big thing on everyone's minds is why did something we're saying should have taken 15 minutes took over 6 hours, right? and why sort of didn't we know about it before we started doing the release? So generally what we do is when we're doing a release, and this goes for all recent releases in the past few years, is when we get ready to do a release, one person goes and makes sure that the tag's ready. For CVE releases, since the tags are in a private repository, they have to push them to the public repository. Another person does the pushing of the packages, and someone else does announcements to the community. So those three things happen in parallel, and usually they all take about 15 minutes, and the release is done, and everyone sails into the sunset. This time, the pushing of the packages took significantly longer. And the root cause of that essentially was that at some point, when we were preparing for the release, there was a command run against the repository, which actually destroyed some of the repository. So the repository was recreated. This is, if I recall, this is the staging repository that we're talking about, was recreated. But when it was recreated, we didn't preserve the timestamps on all the files. So when we went to sync the staging repository with the production repository, instead of just syncing the files based on timestamp, it synced everything based, I believe, on hashing. So some of this we're still investigating, but essentially this is the gist of it, that when we went to go doing the sync, we ended up syncing everything instead of syncing just the few files that needed to be changed. And that took an extremely long time. So we are still digging into getting an exact root cause to like completely understand exactly what happened. And we'll be doing that over the next few days. And we plan to, at some point next week, publish a technical explanation of exactly what happened. Now, as far as preventing this sort of thing in the future, we have some ideas. I think the one that's on the top of everyone's list right now would be to move the repository to more of an A-B style repository, to where we can stage the production repository beforehand. And when we move from one release to the next, it's simply changing a symlink or changing something on a load balancer to point to the new repository, similar to how a lot of people do deployments of web applications these days. So that'll be the ideal situation that we're going to be looking to get to. Again, there's still technical things to work out there, so we don't know for sure 100% that that's the direction we're going to end up at, or that's where we're going to end up at, but that's the direction we're going to pursue. So hopefully that will work out. And if not, we'll be thinking of other ways to improve that process. And we'll, if needed, we'll definitely be reaching out to the community for input on that. The other thing the other point we'd just like to discuss is that, so this was a very significant security issue, and we patched for the issue. We did our testing, and in the last day before we were ready for the release, we discovered one issue that came up, which was published as a known issue in the release notes. And then after we've done the release, there was another issue discovered with older minions talking to newer masters. So both of these are, I wouldn't really say edge cases, because they're both definitely supposed to be supported by us. They're maybe not as prevalent. Like, you know, I don't know how many people have older minions talking to new masters and how many people are using the runner. Maybe not the majority of people, but definitely they're supported situations. So we should have caught both of them. And that just speaks to us knowing that we need to have more tests in place, both automated So that's requiring unit tests and integration tests for the code base. That's something that we've already implemented, and over time, we expect to get better and better because of requiring tests. And then also just us doing a better job of validating things before we get ready to make a release announcement. So, making sure that we do manual tests against everything, and when we identify things where we've slipped, making sure that we add those as manual tests that we need to run if they're not already automated. This is definitely the approach we've taken in the past, SaltStack as a whole, but just this release sort of highlights, with the severity of the issue, it really would have been best to nail the release and nail the patches and make sure there was no issues. So it just is a reminder to us that we need to up our game and do a better job in the future.
There's a couple of, thank you very much, Diwas, for that. There's also just a couple of areas that got surfaced I want to touch on that came through the community feedback. And of course, for those on the phone, please feel free to chime in with any questions or comments. And then those who are listening afterwards, please always reach out to us with, again, any questions or comments. The first one was, will we be looking to be transparent on the topic of what happened? Absolutely. As Diwas shared, we're setting ourselves a target for Monday to publish, Monday or Tuesday, we're going to be publishing a root cause analysis with the technical details and what we're doing about it. So again, look forward to everybody's input into that as to how we can improve on those particular issues. The second question that came in, we had a little bit of chatter happening around making the 2017 and 2018 patches available behind the form. What's sort of the reasoning behind that? So I just want to make sure that everybody, we as a community, are aware that both 2017 and 2018 are not supported versions. Our support team, who's really behind the scenes making sure that they get to everybody that has questions and so on, I've had 2 experiences in the past where we've lent patches for unsupported versions directly on GitHub. And of course, these things have legs and people end up modifying them, applying them in ways that nobody's able to verify or go back to the client and ask questions and or the community member and give them feedback or say, hey, by the way, we discovered something else, go ahead and update it. So the best practice that seemed to have worked for a recent out of support view was to just get people to at least share with us some contact information. A lot of the information in that form is optional, but to just share it with us contact so that the support team knows who's downloaded it. And if we need to follow up on any other known issues, we can get to that. I understand that there are some ad blocking and so on side effects. I know that Sage and team have passed those along not too long ago to our marketing team, which is where this forum is hosted, to make sure that those get addressed. So we'll take that. The third comment that came in around the CVE itself is folks have asked if we can actually share details around how to recreate or verify that what the actual attack structure looks like. And I just want to verify that just like F-Secure has adhered to, we do not plan to share that, not anytime soon. We're going to continue to monitor the open ports that have been scanned and so on. And until we reach a point where we feel that folks have been able to apply the patches, minimize the risk of exposure, we would kind of do a little bit more of a feedback on here's how you can build a test that verifies that you do not have any of these open ports. Any other questions, comments on this particular topic, team? And I should just say, while folks are thinking about this or thinking through their questions or comments, Sage will probably need to go ahead and post.
Actually, we don't. We are at full minutes, so we're good to continue.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Excellent.
Yeah, I just got a message that said, you only have 3 minutes. Stop talking.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sage.
You're welcome.
Okay, any questions or comments on the CVE team? Any feedback?
There was a comment that just came in from Eric in the chat that's semi-related to this. So it's I don't know if Eric wants to read it, or I can read.
Yeah,
question.
I'm just. It seems like with a very visible and very severe issue like this, it seems like the right thing to do would be to have a professional security audit done and then transparently post the results. That if you're looking to alleviate any uneasiness or fears about further vulnerabilities being found.
Yeah, no, that's a great comment, Eric. Interestingly, we've actually done a security audit about 3 months ago. Okay. And we published that to actually the paying clients, because that's part of their process, especially when you're dealing with government agencies and so on. We would have expected that this would have been caught, and it's not. So we're actually going back to verify that, to understand why they did not get caught, and frankly, whether we need to work with somebody else. So I'll just leave it at that for now, but your suggestion stands on its own. We are talking about doing another security audit, and yes, I don't see a reason why we would not publish that unless there is an element in it that allows somebody to exploit a SALT user before we've addressed it. So if we choose to publish, it will be at a timing where we feel we've addressed those issues and there's no potential exploitation. Make sense, Eric?
Yep, especially the part about not going with the same company again.
Yep. Yep. Mike, I think you mentioned you had a question as well. Please go ahead.
I do. So thanks for the response on the attack surface question. My concern was not so much about the attack surface, but one of the things that we're getting are questions from our security team about auditing. They want to be able to understand what exposure was like, what they can look for in terms of audit logs to try to determine whether or not a master has been compromised or whether there was an attempt at compromising the master, and what sort of best practices people should take in order to verify that a master is secure. Are things like key rotation recommended? Is there going to be any sort of documentation about additional steps that need to be taken as a result of masters which could have been exposed to a threat as a result of this security incident?
So in the hardening SALT documentation, there was an update to that to highlight logs that you can look for to see if, so this would be after you're patched, to see if anybody is trying to run methods that they shouldn't be running remotely. I think key rotation, as you said, actually, that is something that we didn't think about, but that's definitely something we should probably recommend in a blog post. So not the master public-private key, but the key that the local client uses to connect to the master. That's the key that we need to be concerned about. As far as just trying to understand what happened, like what the attack surface was like, the best way to understand that without us going ahead and just publishing like a step-by-step guide would be to just look at the tests that were written as a part of the fix. That should give you a pretty solid understanding of like what exactly was going on.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Just to clarify, the question is mostly about auditing. Again, in large organizations, security teams are going to ask their operations folks, all right, what do I need to look for in terms of logging, either on the master or in firewall logs or what have you, to make a determination about whether or not this patched master was exploited in the past. And so the more information that we can get about that, the better, and certainly the sooner the better, because those questions are quite urgent in some cases.
Yeah, no, that's well noted, Mike. I understand, and we're working with Mayhole on some of that. By the way, I will say that one of the lessons we're picking up from this particular one is also that, we have relationships with a lot of the security scanning companies, Tenable, Qualys, etc. And so part of what we're also doing is working with them to be able to also scan and be able to at least detect if an issue exists and so on. So as part of that work, that's causing us to think, what should you be looking for to know if you're exposed or not? But yeah, give us a few days and we'll work on them. I understand the urgency.
That would be great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Any other questions or comments, team? Okay, I think, Cassandra, that's our CVE update.
Yes. All right, so now into something that is, I think, going to be a little bit fun. So I know last week we did an internal code jam to kind of log or burn down all of those 900 and some odd items in the PR backlog. We are going to do another code jam with the community to burn down another bunch of items. I think we've identified around 75 or so items. What we'll do is we'll have a 3-day, basically 8 hours a day time block where people are welcome to grab issues that they want to work on, and then we will have SALT Core team members available kind of hosting and watching and able to answer your questions and stuff. And there will be some fun little swag items and incentives for those who participate in the code jam. I'm still working out on the scheduling, but it's going to start May 5th. It's going to go through May 7th, and we'll be doing, because we have people across the Americas and Europe, we'll be having support for people in both time zones and both time blocks. So does anybody else, I think Gareth wanted to talk a little bit more about this, or somebody had more detail?
Yeah, so just to kind of recap about our internal code jam, we identified roughly 100 PRs, pull requests that we wanted to get in for the Sodium release. And of that 100 PRs, we got roughly, I think, 78 of them actually into new pull requests. Some of those were with efforts from the community. So Eric had done a bunch, community member Christian McHugh had done a bunch. I saw some from Kirill, as well as a handful of others. So of that 78 so far, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong here, Daniel, but I think a majority of them got merged. Is that correct?
I think probably over half at least. So yeah, majority. There are still several, probably at least 20 that have the needs test case label added to them.
I think that I have only one of the initial batch that I haven't added a test case for, and I just don't know anything about the code, so would appreciate some assistance on that. Also have a user's I think a user add module bug fix that is pretty important to get fixed, or a user state fix rather. I think it may still have some failing tests, but I would appreciate being able to work with someone to get that into Sodium.
Yeah,
it's just like
that
pop that into Slack somewhere, and then we'll get someone on it.
Cool.
Sorry, I interrupted you there. D, what were you saying?
I said the exact same thing you did. Just ping on Slack, and we'll get it in the queue.
And what this is something that just I just thought of. There's a code coverage test that seems to just not be passing ever. Is that because I have horribly, is there something horribly wrong about about the PRs that I'm opening, or is it an actual broken test?
I can chime in on that. This is Pedro. We have in the past been abusing CodeCov, and from a talk that we had with them, they mentioned that they were having a hard time processing the amount of data that we were uploading. Yeah.
Not the first time that has happened with us.
We have since reduced by half the amount of data that we are sending, but that still doesn't solve the problem. There were some conversations with them on their forums about how we can just disable all pull request interaction. They provided some tips, which we tried. And right now I have an unanswered question for a couple of weeks, just to get that last final bit. Eventually they will get back to us, or we will probably, since you already mentioned that, and you're probably not alone, we will just stop uploading until we fix that. So it's not a problem with your code. We just wanted to keep, although not fully accurate because they are not processing all of the data, but some data available. But it's causing more issues right now than solutions. So we will likely just disable that completely until we get that addressed or get a reply back from them and as to why we have what their documentation suggests is required, but it's not working.
Okay. Yeah, I have a number of PRs where that's the only failing one, and I know just from a review or like what needs to be reviewed or what needs to be merged. I feel like seeing an X as opposed to a check mark, it may be a subconscious reason, not even if it's not a subconscious reason not to go in and review that. It may just it may delay the process just because people feel like, oh, well, he hasn't figured out the tests. Let's
No. So this is a problem with CodeCov. All of the core team is aware of this, and that is not a blocking factor to merging a pull request. It's a visual, a visually bad thing to see.
Yeah. That's my point. Is that just the fact that it's showing up as failed. It doesn't give somebody who's looking to review and perhaps merge a good information. So I think removing it is probably a good idea for the time being.
We know that it's okay, but
Cool.
the pull request doesn't know that it's okay. So if it just wasn't there, then they would be green and they would know, hey, I've done everything.
So just circling back to the code jam. So yeah, just to answer the question that Ralph just asked in the chat, it will be next week, starting May 5th through the 7th, and we're going to identify a number of PRs that we want, pull requests that we want to make sure to get into Sodium. They'll be tagged in either like a project board or some other method, and then we'll. Anyone that's available to help us kind of shepherd those in as pull requests, greatly appreciated. So we're going to identify ones that have existing tests, but for any that don't, we, the core team, will be available for both helping anyone get the PRs in, as well as help write tests for those PRs. So the question is, do you need to be there all day? No, we're going to run them. I think, Cassandra, we were going to do like 12-hour blocks.
8 hours.
But no, go ahead.
Oh, we're going to do 8-hour blocks. So logistics, what I had to do is I had to email our team members and find out what time everybody is available to be online and help out with this. From there, I'll be creating a schedule, but it'll start on one day. It'll start in the morning, and then it'll start kind of late. It'll start earliest on Tuesday and start latest in the day on Thursday, so that we can cover time zones. And This can be done asynchronously as well, but we want to make sure that for at least a chunk of every day that somebody's available to answer your questions.
Yeah, and whatever time you can give is appreciated. If you have an hour, if you have 2, great. We're going to try to be available during lots of time zones so that we can answer those questions and make sure that we're available to you. But any participation that we can have, we'll take.
Yeah. And I will create a Slack channel because we all need more Slack channels, but I'll create one for the PR Merge Jam so we can keep the conversation into there. I see a question about how to sign up. I did post a link in chat about the Sensitive Community Salt Stack site, and that's where you can find the event info for the PR Merge Code Jam. Yes, everything will be written down. We'll also have a kickoff meeting on Tuesday morning that will explain what this process will look like, and we'll make that live along with some instructions for those who can't make it to that kickoff. And if there are, I know some people kind of have PRs that are important to them, that are ones that they've submitted, that are ones they wanted a status on. This is going to be a good time to get those things addressed, taken care of, and tested.
Yeah, as far as the PRs, sharing the PRs ahead of time, we have, as I mentioned, we have a project board that I'm just digging up
I have it
to now that has all of the PRs that pull requests that we identified. Oh, there it is. We identified that we want to get into the master branch for sodium, or just in general that need to get merged forward.
Yeah, that board is what just needs to get merged forward. I posted one earlier in this chat that narrows it down to those that are labeled Code Jam, and specifically in the first column. And that's what we'll work from, and we'll have more details as we get a little bit closer. And yes, we'll write that down. I thought I might even do a small instructional video on how to use this board so that we can all be on the same page, and we'll post that as well.
Yeah, just to reiterate the Wayne's comments there in chat, if you want to get a jump on things and start porting things over early, you don't need to wait until next week. If you see one, particularly if it's one that that you had previously worked on, that got into one of the other branches, either develop or one of the other release branches, you would definitely be the person that would be able to hopefully get that in as easy as possible. So by all means, don't feel the need to wait until next week to start working on those PRs.
And then once this all wraps up, we'll provide a status update of what all we did. And like I said, we have a Salt Stack store now, and we'll be sending some codes to everybody who participates to get some sort of some swag items. I'm still working on what those packages look like, but something to kind of recognize you for volunteering your time and your knowledge to the project. Okay, I'm looking for more questions. Okay, cool. Are there any other questions on that? And yes, that is a good point, Ralph, about starting now. Part of why we're doing this next week is so that we have it in place before code freeze. Okay, well, we have about 8 minutes or so for any additional discussions, questions.
There was a question that popped up in the chat. I don't know if Mike wants to ask it directly, but it was regarding regressions, specifically about the mine regression.
Yeah, I'm just interested to know two questions. One specifically, when will the fixes for the mine regression land? And in Slack, there was a discussion about the regression policy. And I was surprised to learn that the policy seems to be that there will only ever be one fix if, one release for regressions after any given release, regardless of when those regressions are discovered or any other timeline. So I'm interested in both knowing when the mine regressions will be fixed and released, clarification about the regression fixed policy for releases.
I can speak on the mine update. I believe you're referring to this one. I'm gonna post it. Is that correct?
Let me look. Yeah, that's the one I'm interested in.
Yeah, so that's committed for sodium. And to elaborate on the second question, my understanding, and anybody can correct me, is that the severity of the issue would determine if another release would need to be done, not just necessarily we only do one release. If something is critical, then we would do another release. As far as I understand it.
Yeah, so Mike, when you look at the release cycles that we have and the rolling sort of release structure, the plan is that we have that freeze period in which we're taking in issues based on the drop of, the latest. We would prioritize a list and we'll start working through those, and then we'll get the dot whatever it may be. We would hope that we would have caught, all of the issues that people might have found during that window of time, and then of course prior, either through release candidates testing, which we're trying to get earlier ahead of the actual formal GA, and or of course others that we might have found during the time of the release or so on. But basically we prioritize the bucket and we go for that. So now imagine 3001 comes out on June 17, and you have that window of the 2 weeks in which we found those issues, and we'll release a 3001.1. If after that we discover there's some other high severity issues, regressions, etc., we will make an assessment on those, impact for clients, severity of the issue, etc., and we'll determine whether we need to do 3001.2. So there's nothing in our policy that says we would not do a 3001.2. We would, as Megan said, wait for that. Now, there is a point in time when you look at the train, if you like, or there's a point in time in which you start to wonder whether you should continue to do a 3001.3, or should you just roll it into magnesium, because everything is being staged and tested for magnesium. And that's another decision point we make into, okay, something did not make it into 3001.1 or 3001.2, which are the follow-ons to sodium. So maybe we're better off to actually roll it into magnesium. The thing that we are going to be much better at, which I'm grateful for Sage's help in doing that, is we're going to constantly be updating these transparent boards so people understand what issues are we trying to get in for a 3001.1 or a 3001.2 if we're going to do one, or it's going to roll into magnesium. Does that help, Mike?
Yes, that helps quite a lot. And that's similar to what my understanding was. I think there may have been some confusion in a Slack discussion, because I think some people were left with the impression that there would only ever be one release, but your explanation makes perfect sense and is in line with what I thought the original intention of the stuff was. So that's great. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Mike. So Cassandra, I think we should take an action maybe to just note just a simple light blog that says, just a reminder, as we're entering, the freeze for sodium, this is how things will work for, post sodium and so on, and gives us a chance to clarify this point that might help us, be aware of.
Okay. Yep, making a note of that. Okay. Okay, I don't see any additional questions. Let me double check my DMs. Yep, no additional questions or anything. So I think that we are ready to wrap this meeting. Thank you everybody for joining, for participating. Excited to see what we can do during the code jam, and hope you all have a good day.
Thank you, Cassandra. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you all.